Well, good morning. It's a good crowd at 8 o'clock in the morning on the last day of the conference. Brian Walsh with the Washington State DOT. This is kind of a unique session. It was the brainchild of Ed Myers here with Kittelson Associates, and he asked me to be the moderator because I like moderating. And I think what you'll find out, I'm going to go through and introduce the four panelists. And the idea here is to have a fairly good forum. We're going to have them answer questions for about the first 45 minutes to an hour, and then we're going to engage some of you guys. I think that we want to make this as interactive as we can. There's a lot of good roundabout experience sitting here. And hearing these guys' stories, I think that short of calling it a family, it's a good thing to share stories, because many of us have been through some difficult times implementing roundabouts, and there's a lot of success stories, and maybe something that will trigger some of you to think, hey, maybe I'll try that back where I'm at. So with that, I will go through and introduce the panelists in order as they sit to my right here. Ed Myers. Ed is with, he runs the Baltimore office of Kittelson Associates. And Ed I've known Ed for quite a while, and he was in it at the beginning. He came from Maryland. Obviously, Baltimore's in Maryland, last time I checked. And yeah. He worked for a firm called Hurst Roche, and Hurst Roche eventually moved on to Kittelson. But Hurst Roche did a lot of early work with Maryland and their very first implementation of rural roundabouts. So Maryland was certainly an early adopter. The gentleman to his right is Jeff Shaw from the Office of Safety at the Federal Highway Administration, and Jeff has been just a real support to the whole state DOT thing across the country as well as in our territories. And Jeff, with the peer-to-peer program, probably has as wide a vision of this thing as anybody sitting up here. So welcome, Jeff. Next to Jeff is Ken Sides from the city of Clearwater, Florida. And Ken may be our guy who went with the most ambitious roundabout out of the gate. Ken is a very good spokesperson for roundabouts. He works for the city of Clearwater still, and there's a roundabout there that's a pretty special one. It's been metered. It handles thousands of 50,000 vehicles a day on a busy summer day, so what a great little thing to have in your backyard. And to his right is Howard McCulloch. Howard's with Northeast Roundabouts, and Howard has done a lot of work with New York State DOT in implementing roundabouts across their state and a national resource as well. Does a lot of training. So with that, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to ask a few questions actually to the audience. So how many government types are in here today? Just to give the group. Okay. Consultants? Okay, about another third. And then any independents or maybe people that are affiliated with pedestrian bike issues, accessibility? Okay. Other, thank you. Software developer for Roundabout software, thank you, Robbie. Other. And other, Gene, a professor at Kansas State University and runs this whole show. So great, well welcome. I just want to get a feel for a lot of government types, we can share a lot of stories. Everybody here pretty much represents that or supports that. So the first question, what I'm going to do is have these guys answer the questions in order, and they can jump around, but I think I'll work to my right. And the first question, I'm going to pose questions, and you'll get a chance to hear some things that are unique, I hope. Ask the panelists here, all the panelists, how did you start working in roundabout practice? Were you a designer, maybe on the traffic operations side, or a planner? What are the greatest challenges you faced towards implementation? And maybe Ed, we'll start with you.
Can everyone hear me? So I actually started in, I think the year was 1988. I was the project manager for a planning project in Maryland to put a new interchange on the Washington Beltway. So it was between two interchanges. There's about 4 miles between the two interchanges. I'll try to do this in 90 seconds as best I can. So
I'll take 2 minutes.
I didn't know anything about roundabouts. Really had never heard about roundabouts, but and sort of in order, that's probably too strong of a word, came from the planning director of Maryland State Highway. We need to study roundabouts at this location because a gentleman by the name of Ken Todd. Has anyone heard of Ken Todd? So Ken had been pushing roundabouts. He was from the UK but lived in Washington, D.C., and he made it his business to go around to public meetings in D.C., Virginia, and Maryland to push roundabouts. So somehow he got to then Senator McCulloch. She's still Senator McCulloch from the state of Maryland. She passed the letter on to State Highway we need to look at roundabouts at this location. So what do? This was unfortunately before Al Gore took the time to invent the internet, so I couldn't do any research on the internet. So I actually went to my alma mater to do some research at Penn State, found some articles, and what I found was kind of illuminating to me, and actually I just sent all these articles to Brian as the keeper of the Roundabout Library. So these were from the 1980s in Sweden, UK, Australia, France, all these countries that were putting in roundabouts, and so I sort of lined them up, and I'm not a researcher. Kittelson is some sort of known for researching. I'm not a researcher, but the pattern was clear. There was 60 to 80% reduction in crashes. So that's, I put that in front of the senior leaders at State Highway Administration. They very quickly got on board at the very highest levels within State Highway. The SHA administrator then, Hal Kassoff, and the SHA planning manager, Neil Peterson, and Tom Hicks, who's the state traffic engineer. And that's very important. So there was buy-in from the very highest within the organization, and so it pushed down from there. We will implement roundabouts. They also said, we will not implement a roundabout at this location on this beltway, or at this interchange on the Washington Beltway, at least not initially. So we found some rural high-speed locations where there were crash problems, and that's how Maryland's roundabout program started. That interchange, that's the I-95 Ritchie Marlboro Road interchange, that actually did eventually get built as with roundabouts as the intersection treatments, but probably 14 years later. So.
Ed, thank you, and bear with us, you guys. We're going to set up a second mic, so we'll work around this as it goes. Ed, I've heard the story from Ed many times, but concise. I like that. Thank you. Jeff, thoughts on that question?
Sure. I guess my involvement with roundabouts came a little bit later and was a lot less successful. I was a district geometrics engineer for Illinois DOT in District 1, which is the Northeast Illinois Chicago region. And this is coming on the heels of the first edition of the Roundabouts Guide being published in the year 2000. Saw an opportunity for our first roundabout, actually proposed at the time not only the first roundabout, but would have been the first closely spaced dog bone type layout. Just dive right into the deep end of the pool, and that didn't even get out of the bureau. So the bureau chief was a little bit risk averse. I think they were quite happy just being one of the pioneers at that time, and they in the mid-90s really embraced the single point interchange and felt like maybe that was enough innovation within IDOT at the time. So long story short, ended up leaving Illinois, coming to federal highways, picking up, becoming hopefully a quick learner from a lot of the experts that are here at this conference and around the nation, around the world, and just becoming a champion at the federal level at that point. And I'm happy to say that finally, here 14 years after the fact, Illinois is about to go to letting on their first roundabout, Illinois District 1. So very happy about that, ready to pop the bottle of champagne. And you know, I think the lesson there was persistence is absolutely essential. And you never know when that opportunity to innovate is going to present itself. Clearly, we weren't ready in 2000 in Illinois. But eventually, times change. Eventually, the message permeates the thinking, both at the organizational level and at the individual level. And you just can't stop looking for that opening. And so finally, everything lined up, the stars aligned, and we're going to have it hopefully very soon. In the meantime, we also have an infamous traffic circle in Des Plaines, Illinois. And it's upwards of 30,000 vehicles a day with stop signs, 5 legs, multi-lane weaving, all of the bad.
Suicide circle.
Suicide circle. And so anything that resembled that was really a third rail to the folks in District 1, but I think we finally got there. So,
good story, Jeff. I had forgotten your time at IDOT.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ken?
I know serendipity and happenstance and a single provocateur, Tim Todd writing a letter has caused the following trajectory in what we've been doing, and that was true of me too. In '97, I was invited on a weekend retreat to write a book, a short book by Dan Burton, who's a livability advocate, and he likes to assemble teams and put them to work for several concentrated days, and we did this. And one of the people there was a guy who talked about roundabouts, and so I made a mental note that I never heard of roundabouts. If ever this came up again, I knew someone to call, and that was Michael Walworth. So sometime after that, several months after that, I was at my new job at the city of Clearwater, and the city Clearwater had hired a new city manager to kind of shake up the economy and get things going, because at this point we were 10 years into the biggest economic boom that the world had ever seen, and yet Clearwater Beach had vacant storefronts on our beach, and that's the engine of Clearwater. So the city manager came in and shook things up, and designated several districts, and he had some high-powered consultants he brought in, like Charlie Stevens, an attorney and planner, and they came up with a vision plan and identified several economic development districts, including our downtown and including the beach. And the consultant said, well, you need a gateway or an entryway to your beach, and that should be a roundabout. So that idea came from a planning attorney. So the word went down to the Public Works, and the meeting was hastily assembled, and I was supposed to be the transportation engineer, so I was called in, and we had some consultants there. It was obvious that nobody knew anything about this. So I said, well, why don't we call someone who does? And we got the speakerphone, and I guess I might just carded in my wallet still or something, I don't know. But anyway, we put through a call, and it quickly became clear that it was a real advantage to have someone who's experienced working on this. So we were given the mandate that we had to design and build this project in time for the new millennium. And at this point, it was sometime during 1998, and we couldn't push that date back. So my role was to select a consultant and a sub-consultant for geometrics, which was Walworth, and assemble the team. At this point, my manager wasn't really paying much attention to the project. I brought everyone together out in the parking lot on the first day, and my consultants who know each other put us all into a 15-person van that I got from the Parks Department, and we drove down to the beach, which was an existing hodgepodge of 9 intersections and 3 signalized intersections. It was sort of a loop, and bonded and discussed various ideas as we parked and looked at the site. And then we went back to where I had a room reserved for the day, had lunch brought in, had whiteboards all the way around, and we discussed ideas and put them all on the board. And by the end of the day, we decided what compromises we were going to make and why. And the general conception was laid out, and took pictures of that, and the project was designed and built from there. So it was something that happened to me that I didn't seek out. And of course, as many people know, the project became very controversial. Well before it was open, while it was under construction, people were screaming at the construction workers. And there were a lot of other issues involved with this. I've got about 20 seconds left.
It's okay.
Besides the roundabout itself, it was a highly visual lightning rod for lots of other issues. The changes that the city manager wanted to make were not well received in many circles. So to speak. For example, he wanted to redevelop downtown. Well, a lot of people said, well, why do you want to redevelop downtown? I never go downtown. And other people did not want the value of homes to go up because they're on a fixed retirement income. They didn't want their houses to be more valuable and pay more taxes. Other issues that had nothing to do with the roundabout. The Church of Scientology has a very large presence in downtown Clearwater. And a lot of people don't like that and didn't want to do anything to improve downtown. So the city manager and his plans for Clearwater's future were controversial, and the roundabout became a giant lightning rod for lots of issues that had nothing to do with roundabouts.
Well stated. Yeah, well stated. Thank you, Ken. And Howard.
I guess I'll cover my 2 different hats, my state side and my private side. When I first started at New York State DOT back in '98, we had just formed a roundabout committee. And being the fact if anyone's from the northeast part of the country, I've lived next to Latham Traffic Circle pretty much my entire life, which in the 20s was in that great circle. In 1957, New York State took the main route, tunneled it underneath. So from 57 on, we had a single point roundabout interchange, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I lived next to it, and I loved the intersection. So when I got to DOT, I'm like, hey, I hear about this roundabout committee. I was told, too late, we already got main office design on that committee. So about a year passed, and then that person took a promotion, so me and another individual got put in as the part-time roundabout experts. We were the faces of roundabouts in New York State, even though we hadn't designed one, hadn't built one, and barely knew what they were, but we were now the contacts for roundabouts. That went on for about 2001. I went out to Vail to take Lee Forston's roundabout design class, started getting more comfortable. Also, which helped then was our chief engineer went on the AASHTO European scanning tour for signalized intersections. And when he came back, he's like, I've seen roundabouts in every size, shape, form. Until you screw something up bad enough that I have to get involved, feel free. He also allowed me to then be assisting FHWA, kind of a peer-to-peer favor way back before the peer-to-peer program was even done. Jeff Baird was assisting that. And they finally said, well, you're running all over the country. I went to Montana, a few other states, and I'm like, you need to stop doing that. So I said, well, can I do it on my own time? Of course, the first response was no, conflict of interest. So it took about a year to go back and forth, and they finally allowed me in 2003 to create any roundabouts. So since then, I've been a full-time, well, 70% New York State DOT employee, as well as my company, Any Roundabouts.
Yes, thanks. Very flexible, Howard. I think about my own state DOT process as well. It's interesting as you see individual stories when you go around, and many of you think about how you got started. And the early part, obviously, this roundabout thing, there just weren't many to point to. So you tried to get that one, and interestingly enough, all these guys got to see one eventually get put somewhere they thought should be done. So the next question, I'm going to skip around because I think that we want to cut to the chase a little bit. We've had a lot of good conference sessions that talk about real and perceived obstacles to the implementation of roundabouts, and I want to hear the perspective from these guys about where they see real obstacles. They're there, and then the perceived ones that we seem to. Yeah, it's a big society, 315 million Americans, I'll speak for the United States, but how do you bring along consensus with 315 million people if that many people want to get engaged? So, Jeff, why don't you go with the start of that one, for your federal highway perspective on perceived and real.
Perceived and real, okay. I think there's two parts to that at least. There's kind of within the profession, and then outside our stakeholders who aren't the traffic engineers and the designers and so on. Internally, I think I'm surprised at how quickly the learning curve is sharpening up. The knowledge on roundabouts and the preconceived notions and the misperceptions, I think, are largely becoming irrelevant. There's still occasionally times when you run into an individual and you have to gently correct them about their ideas about roundabouts. But overall, I think I'm finding more and more people not only don't have, they're not averse to the idea, but they're actually quite excited about tackling it. And so then it becomes an issue of coaching and educating and not trying to convince people that their ideas are wrong. On the public side, the perceptions, I think, are still a great challenge. And one of the things that's both a misperception and a big surprise to me are the isolated cases, and yet more than one, where state legislators have picked up a gauntlet and tried to introduce anti-roundabout legislation. I never would have thought that, obviously elected officials get involved in transportation projects all the time. That's no surprise. And they want what they want, and that's understood. But to the point where you would individually select one type of solution and propose legislation that could make that almost impossible to ever consider again has been really a very genuine surprise to me. And it's happened in 2 different states that I'm aware of, and at least one locality, and all over the country too. It's not just a West Coast or East Coast or Midwest phenomenon. So I think that's something that I would say we need to be very attuned to. Remember to keep your elected officials in mind when you're considering roundabouts, and in fact, there's some good lessons out there that show that Our best efforts at educating our elected officials are when you don't have a specific project in mind. Educate them on the concepts before they can pick on a location and disagree with you. So, does that help?
Yeah, very good point, and I'll open it here in a second to the panel, but a very good point on the fact that educating people before there's a project to like have the lightning rod piece happen is a really good piece of information. I think for many of us that sit in localities that talk roundabouts on probably a daily basis, we get reputations, but at the same time we're working the education piece as much as we can when you don't have a project you're specifically talking about. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Anybody on the panel that wants to spend maybe a 30-second, not rebuttal, certainly Jeff was right on that, but more of a comment to add to that?
I'll just, and I'll keep this to 30 seconds. The real perceived issue that I deal with and Howard probably deals with as well is because of the proximity to Washington DC traffic circles and New Jersey traffic circles and Cape Cod traffic circles. And there are some in Pennsylvania, the old style traffic circles, we still deal with that. I mean, obviously in Maryland, that over time that's been minimized. When Pennsylvania started building roundabouts just a few years ago, they had to go through that same issue. So I would say that's a perceived issue. It's not a real issue, but you have to go through the public involvement process to convince others that it is a different animal.
I think a major issue in New York is just overall cost. Trying to compare that to another alternative that could be a third to a quarter of the cost, and trying to convince the person that only has so much money in their pocket every year to put a project on the ground that it's worth that extra $700,000 or $800,000 to do the roundabout instead of the other alternative.
Yeah, great comment. I maybe relate to that as a moderator. Cost seems to really internally, and it's real. Why does one cost $2.5 million and the other one we can do for $400,000 on paper? Yeah. Ken?
So to continue Clearwater story, we had 18 months of getting beat up really badly in the press and articles around the United States and even in Europe. We were completely and totally astonished when the Beach Association, the Clearwater Beach Association, which represents businesses and residents on the beach, asked the city to build another roundabout on the beach. These are people that have to use a big beach roundabout every day. And they even gave us a check for $3,000 to contribute toward it. And we suddenly realized, well, maybe what you read in the paper isn't indicative of how everybody feels. And this is an older population on the beach too, so we built that one-lane roundabout, and it was a perfect charm, and worked perfectly ever since. And the next thing that happened, in an independent track, unrelated, was that one of my duties was to get a traffic calming program started. And I began it the conventional way, where I worked with a couple residents, come up with a design. We'd have public meetings, half people loved it, half people hated it, half people loved me, half people hated me, and it was a usual mess. So I wanted to try something different, so I got a hold of Dan Burton again, who does charrettes, and we tried that, and that was really successful. We got a very high consensus right off the bat. And before these citizens became citizens designers, they had to go through a 3-hour class on Saturday to learn the 25 different ways to slow down traffic, only one of which was roundabouts. And roundabouts were not given any particular emphasis at all. It was just one of the tools in the tool chest. And then they would sit down with maps of their neighborhoods, and we were completely amazed when they started drawing circles all over the place. And that was in 2000, 2001, and we've now built 25 roundabouts, only one of which was proposed by government. The first one, the Big Beach Roundabout, the second one by the Beach Association, and the remaining 23 all came out of these charrettes we did back in the summer of 2001 and 2002, I guess it was. Millions of dollars worth of infrastructure improvements, with very high consensus, signature petitions of property owners of more than 65%, or one neighborhood, 95% of the properties. No controversy whatsoever. So that was very interesting. It was a bottom-up way to get to roundabouts, which again, I just stumbled into. But it's something to keep in mind. And politicians didn't touch it. None of the other engineers have touched these designs, because the actual design by the neighborhood, which was good technically, these were good designs, had a petition supporting them. So even over the years, we didn't revisit these designs, we didn't have any more public meetings. So from an engineer's point of view, it was gold, you know, I could go ahead and proceed without stopping and redesigning anything. So that's an interesting bottom-up approach that just happened to me and happened to work out very successfully.
Thanks, Ken. Howard, a question here maybe to start on your side there. What context have you seen roundabouts do the most good? And that would be from a safety standpoint, and maybe if you had different examples of an operational improvement. And all of you, I'll have a chance to answer this question because I think that this is a wide open question.
Okay, I guess biggest improvement from a safety perspective is the rural two-way stop. You may not have many crashes at a rural two-way stop, but if you do, they're pretty severe. So I think that's a great location to put in roundabouts. Also, you probably have the right-of-way available, which is a major challenge for roundabouts. From an operational perspective, urban 5- or 6-legged signalized intersections, they're very inefficient, they're unsafe, you have the room, make a significant impact replacing, we have one intersection in Glens Falls, New York, which is a very small town, had a 5-legged signal, 2.5-minute cycle length roughly, and you sat through 3 cycles in a B&B. So when people were avoiding this intersection, avoiding downtown. We went in, proposed a roundabout, and the locals thought we were tricking the program when they saw how little delay they were going to have with a roundabout instead of the signal. So they had to count cars for 10 minutes. They thought for some reason we were tricking the program. And then they thought, oh, well, now we've fixed the one problem, we've just shoved it to the next intersection down. So we had to build a bigger model and just show that really it was at one choke point because the 5-legged signal was so inefficient. Everything else worked in the network.
Yeah, good example. Yeah.
I would actually echo what Howard said, but I would probably also reinforce it. If I were a state DOT official out there that is thinking about getting into roundabouts, the rural two-way stop would be the place I would start, and that's really what we decided to do in Maryland after we decided that this freeway interchange on the Washington Beltway with 200,000 cars a day was not going to be the first location. We looked for locations, but actually all of the ones that we looked at in Maryland were high crash locations. So there was a problem that we were trying to solve, and in each of those locations, as we went out to public meetings, everyone wanted to put in a traffic signal, and it wasn't close to warning a traffic signal. And probably if you did put in a traffic signal, it would have increased the accidents, not decreased the accidents. But I still think that is where we as a country are going to get the greatest benefit from roundabouts is rural high-speed locations. And I say that in part because some of the early ones that we put in Maryland were, the best way to describe them is stinkers. They were not very well designed, and I designed all of them. They were short splitter islands, small ICDs. We were designing for WB50s at the time, not WB67, so they were commensurately smaller, but they all still work. And if you're a district traffic engineer or a district safety engineer or whatever, we put those things in 20 years ago, some of them now, and as you know, they weren't great, but there is not a problem there. And so you're done with that intersection for the rest of your career, and that's a good feeling.
That is a great segue, and the gentleman here next there with Jeff. Jeff, so you come from the Office of Safety, and it's amazing how we recognize that many of us that have built these things, safety really, you get safety when you put in this. Can you maybe the question to you is that why do we internally operationally undo them? And this would be a 20-year plan.
Why do we undo that?
I mean, clearly we got there with the safety equation that we know in the roundabout will solve the safety issue, but we seem to operationally then undo the roundabout decision.
Okay.
I'm just stating the question.
No, I think, yeah, this
You know this.
is one that Brian and I have spent many an after-hours beverage debating and philosophizing over. The challenge, I think, that mainly lies before us today as roundabouts have become so much more popular and so much more routine is that now we have to reconcile what roundabouts represent with our standard project delivery process, which means the new construction criteria, which state policies often require 20-year traffic design life at a certain quality of service or level of service. And so making roundabouts work as safe as they can and still try to construct something that's got a lot more traffic and may or may not ever happen, this is a new challenge to us in a lot of ways. The downsides to overbuilding or building for the future with a traffic signal or an interchange aren't as pronounced as they are with roundabouts. And so it's going to take some time for us to try to figure out how best to approach this vis-a-vis roundabouts. Part of it is maybe we need to do a better job of phasing in improvements, of allowing that future capacity to be added at the right time. I think another part of it is we need to get better at our forecasting, but that's a whole separate panel session.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. You're moving in a direction I was hoping, and right after you answered that, I'm going to pass it to Howard, a state DOT perspective of your internal process with the operational piece. And then Ken, we don't want to leave out cities, because this is the difficult part, is to, everybody seems to think that, you know, these divisions between cities, state, federal, there must be different motives. So Howard, just a perspective on your internal process in 90 seconds.
Yeah, 90 seconds. We definitely are a firm believer in the phased-in design process and not designing for the 20 years. I'll see Bill in the room, but Bill Baranowski actually worked on some of our first roundabouts for the access permit for Corning Glass, their R&D plant. Well, if people had Corning Glass in their stock portfolio back then, they were probably pretty happy. It was about $1.60 a share. A year or two later, it was down to about $2 a share, and what happens to that R&D plant? Not so busy anymore. So we actually have some of our early roundabouts are now 2-lane roundabouts that carry probably 400 cars an hour. So we decided we really don't want to go down that route anymore, designing for the full optimum build that may or may not happen. Our issue now is just how do we do that and fit it to our construction process and the lighting process. So we're looking to build pretty much the outer footprint first, put in larger splitters, larger truck apron, put in the dual runs of curb, just pave between it. So hopefully then even our maintenance forces, if we can get to where our maintenance forces can do that retrofit, that changeover, I think we'd be well served.
Yeah, well stated. I appreciate that segue. Before I get Ken up there, I just want to show you that photo. That photo was roundabout built in Washington State in '98. Same issue that Howard just described. It was staged to go to a multi-lane. I won't speak for geometrics. It was early on. But it's got splitter out of joints, so you can get this thing to a multi-lane. And we're there 17 years. The volumes have adjusted by, I think, 0.1% growth. And I think most of us operation are going to say when you have a signalized stuff feeding this stuff, we weren't going to get much more to get to this location. So I wanted to show that example. You can see there's a great separation there too. I mean, we had money back in the 50s. So, Ken, any thoughts on, from a city perspective, on how you reconcile? I mean, Jeff and Howard have hit a little bit on this whole design year thing and how we try to steer. And you're talking traffic calming and probably not getting caught up in that conversation, but maybe you do. Maybe you've been able to give some perspective on that, how the city looks at this, not getting caught up in, oh, well, we got growth here and we got to do this equation here. You're looking at different purposes of roundabouts.
Well, 2 tracks to roundabouts. One is the track I experienced, which is heavy with serendipity, and it's bottom-up public demand. And just a couple words more about that has gotten roundabouts built. And there are other people besides residents who might want roundabouts. Anyone who wants a signature central intersection or gateway intersection, a university like Stanford is looking at this, or an arts district or business district. Developers, like one of the developers at Bird Rock, Boulevard outside of San Diego, paid $1 million for one of their 5 roundabouts in their corridor. There's a roundabout being designed right now in Sarasota. A $20,000 design fee is being paid by a private individual who stepped up and wrote a check for the design costs. So that's one way that roundabouts can happen. I just want to suggest that people remain open to that. The other track is process, state process or federal process. And although I love the roundabouts that we've built in Clearwater, they haven't saved any lives. These were not at intersections where we were having fatal crashes. And as an engineer, I'd like to see a data-driven track going on as well. These are great suggestions, rural highways where you can have a 1-lane roundabout perhaps, but you've got severe crashes. As a city employee, I don't really have the resources to, even though they're there, I don't have the levers of power to operate them, to look at our GIS and identify all of our intersections where we are having severe crashes or worse, where a simple one-lane roundabout that's sure to be successful would help. And it would be nice if it wouldn't be a problem with a state or federal agency, you know, being perceived as intruding. It would be nice to have some help from state or federal agency to identify these locations, to come in or be invited in and find, look, you've got 17 locations where a simple one-lane roundabout would make a huge difference in your city. Did you know that? So that sort of thing would be nice to have a data-driven, engineering-oriented resource for selecting candidate roundabout locations where you can make a numeric case for them.
Thank you, Ken.
That's my dream list.
All right, I got it down here. I'll remind you in 10 years of what you said. Ed, I had a question for you that I thought was a good one because you were early in on this thing. When you first designed roundabouts and were designing roundabouts, you know, within the business model where you worked, did you really believe it would become an important change?
I actually did. I saw something like this happening, maybe not exactly like this, but I felt like roundabouts were going to become an important part of our toolkit, as Ken said. And I remember having the conversation with my then boss, who didn't see it that way. He just thought it was sort of a passing fad, and so I was clearly proven right. But I mainly from the safety benefits. And we ended up putting in roundabouts in different locations. We have a couple that I would say are akin to the Clearwater roundabout, one in Towson, one in Annapolis, that are gateway treatments, and really I didn't see that as a something that was going to happen. But there's a half a dozen or so of those in the state of Maryland. But just from the safety side, I really thought that they were going to continue to grow, and they have.
Yeah, I appreciate knowing that, the perspective. I can kind of think about how I first got started, and I don't know that I was as big a believer as you were. I was trying to find a way to belong in a state DOT. Yeah. Those are always the challenges when you're young.
Well, just to follow up on that, from 1988 when I first started, for probably 10 years, it's not that way now, but I really didn't do anything but roundabouts, and it's now probably 10 to 20% of what I do, but I was pretty in it at that point, so I saw that there was going to be more of this.
You work for a firm that has an army of roundabout people. That's how I look at it. And don't take that in a negative way.
Yeah.
I think that certainly your business model has moved on for other things to be done too. Jeff, any thoughts on when you got involved in this? Obviously, you came out of state DOT and then moved on to federal highways.
Yeah, I guess I saw the potential for them to become popular, not because of the safety benefits actually, but because I thought what we weren't talking about when the first guide came out, because the guide came from largely the safety community, was the operational benefits. You know, and I thought that was really being undersold at the time for a good reason, and perhaps in some cases is still being undersold. But the operational improvements in most cases is so remarkable, and yet we do rightfully focus more on the safety message. But holy cow, when you look, especially when you start looking outside the peak periods, and just the cumulative benefits of not having to always stop or not having to stop so often, we really overlook that even today in a lot of places.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. Ken, I always think of you when I think of the Futurist magazine, so this is kind of a futurist thing. Ken gives me a hard time about being published in magazines, so I always have to give him a little hard time. I'm not sure why you haven't been in the Futurist yet, but there's questions along that line. It's in the future. There you go. Where do you see the practice moving, Ken? I mean, can you think about where you think it might be headed? What role do you see the roundabouts in the future? It's the second question there. You got an answer there you're looking up?
Number 3.
See, it wasn't completely, it's a little bit couched here. We staged it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as I like to remind everybody, and I even got this into a little piece in my IT journal, sort of a sidebar thing. If you do the math, extrapolate by population from France or Australia, you arrive at the same number of roundabouts for the United States. It's about 450,000 roundabouts. We built 3,000. So we have 447,000 left to go. So I see the construction of roundabouts. There's plenty of ceiling there, but also I see them, some of them anyway, being constructed not just for the reasons we care most about, which is safety and efficiency of operation, but also other groups realizing that they can use roundabouts to pursue their own agenda, and that would be environmentalists, public health officials, folks who are in livability, and folks who are in the complete streets. Some of the movements in the planning field, such as traditional neighborhood design and new urbanism. And these are all groups that should be our natural allies, but they just don't realize yet that the roundabouts can be helpful for them to achieve what they already want to achieve. So lots of ceiling left, lots of growth left, lots of reasons to build roundabouts, and hopefully this will happen. It seems to be kind of slow taking off when you think compared to France and Australia. And I really don't know why France and Australia have built so many so fast. I imagine it's a national policy thing. And it seems, and it seems like whatever the reasons are, somebody ought to find out what it is and see whether that is transferable to the United States, because we certainly are not building them anywhere near the same pace.
Maybe we'll hold that. Yeah, that's a good question. And when we engage the audience here in another 20 minutes, I would love to have that discussion, because it is shocking that you could put 30,000 roundabouts in France and not have. I mean, they've kind of, in a joking way, haven't they ruined the Tour de France? I mean, bicyclists have to go through all these towns now, and you see it on TV. It's changed. But anyway, I'm digressing. I want to stick to a few more questions here before 9 o'clock. Howard, I'll pose this question for you. What concerns? So I'm going to say, what myths do you consider as you engage in roundabouts, and how do you answer those questions? Because you've been through a number of public forums, and these myths come to you. To keep a straight face as you answer, and is there a style that's employed here?
I actually do have a slide and a general PowerPoint show that we usually do for any roundabout project. The typical myths why roundabouts can't be built. Number one reason, trucks can't get through them. So I do show a video of a modular home going through our roundabout in Glens Falls. I get into the roundabouts, just don't work from a capacity side. They just will not work as well as the signal. And show the traffic models comparing the alternatives, what they have now and what we can do in the future with the roundabout. Another one is, we obviously have to deal with, as already mentioned, the rotaries and traffic circles and jug handles that are pretty popular in the Northeast. And also with Albany having Latham Circle, for years we had to compare roundabouts to Latham Circle. Every presentation we went to, we finally decided to kind of optimize Latham Traffic Circle and make it more like a roundabout. I love the one where they may work elsewhere but not here. That's always the big challenge. For some reason, every town thinks they're so much different than the rest of the planet. Their drivers just won't handle that roundabout. That's a tougher one to address. One of the last ones is that, from, I'm trying to think what angle. Best way to describe this. I think I'm going to have to pass on the last one, because I don't know how that.
If you think
not have a straight face.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I know how hard that is after we've heard the same thing 15,000 times. But
one other one would be schools. You can't have a roundabout near a school. I think if that comes up, a great video from Wisconsin talks about it. It's 12 minutes of interviews, public works director, school principal, traffic safety, and they all love the brand new roundabouts, because that's still an issue. You can't have roundabouts near a school. And Ken actually has a spreadsheet on where they are, and that may help.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I'm going to pose that same question to Jeff from a federal highway standpoint, because Jeff, you see states that are at different levels of building roundabouts, and the myths that may occur on a fairly regular basis that you're obviously working actively to try to dismiss.
I think the myths that Howard listed are very, very common ones, no question about it. The truck one for sure. I do have the pleasure of going to public meetings every now and then if I get a request to help support a division office whose state or local agency has a very controversial proposed roundabout. So I love those chances to get out and talk to people and communities. The one that surprises me the most, it's kind of a myth, but it's also really just kind of a warped misperception. But when somebody from the public will sit there and tell you to your face, well, people just won't stop at these. They won't stop. if you're gonna put this at this intersection, how are people gonna stop? And yet, apparently, there's something magical about a stop sign or a traffic signal hanging 17 feet in the air that we'll just take that for granted. Oh yeah, no problem, we can stop at those. But as soon as you actually put a physical feature out there, now all bets are off. I'm consistently shocked at how far people will talk themselves into a frenzy of nonsense that these won't work. It just never stops. Finally, I've gotten very good at letting people go and go and go, and actually pride myself on at least one person at each of these public meetings finally just giving it up and saying, well, you're never going to convince me. I'm just, and they leave. But I'll knock down every obstacle that they can throw up until they finally just concede the point, well, you're never going to make me happy. So. Success.
Excellent. Yeah, well stated. Ed, any sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have one. This is my favorite roundabout story that is kind of related to this. So I was at a public meeting for a project that eventually got built south of Fort Meade, which is where NSA is located. They're probably listening in on this conversation. And some guy comes up to me, and we had a simulation showing. I think it was paramedics, but it doesn't really matter what it was. Paramedics showing how the intersection was going to work from a simulation perspective. And some guy who obviously worked at NSA comes up to me and says, you know and I know that you can make that do anything you want. So we as professional engineers painstakingly built the simulation model, but it didn't convince him that it was accurate. So that's my favorite roundabout story.
It's good. I think for most of us that might be engineers, you know, this has become kind of a social experiment in a lot of ways, and I think that when you get tangled into this stuff, it's always good to remember this is a social experiment, and you as an engineer have to be a regular citizen and try not to get caught up in what maybe you're self-selecting. I mean, engineers are self-selecting people. We like details, we like that.
Well, because what we're really talking about is bringing about change.
Yeah, and change is something, status quo is a strong force. Very good point. Yeah. A few more questions, and then I'll open this up here. This is a loaded question, and I'll start with Ken. Are there any other parts of the transportation sector that need to be engaged in a worthwhile endeavor of getting more roundabouts? You talked about it a little bit, but I think specifically, we talk about cars, and maybe this would be a good chance to open up the multimodal discussion a little bit. Any transportation sector people that, I mean, we're dealing with more bicyclists and pedestrians, but we don't have them all necessarily thinking this thing's very good for the cause.
Yeah, well clearly, low-speed contact water roundabouts are a gift to bicyclists and skaters and persons using walkers, wheelchairs, older persons, and children. But they don't know that, and in fact, some of the advocates for pedestrians and bicyclists are against roundabouts, which makes no sense. And so that needs to be changed, not just to enlist more allies, but also that it's quite damaging for these folks to be hurting their own cause and our cause. Interesting example came out recently. One of the luminaries in the New Urbanism movement, Victor Dover, has just published an absolutely gorgeous book on street design, loaded with really wonderful photographs going back 100 years or more, showing great streets. But he's got a little section in there dissing roundabouts. And his problem was that, well, they're still for cars, they're still auto-centric, they're not people-centric. And the example he cited, that was true enough, but this is really unfortunate to see this happening. He's one of the persons who should be advocating roundabouts, but he didn't realize that a modern roundabout can be more than any other intersection by far, can be made into a people space. Space and public space and people-centric are important buzzwords in the planning, especially the progressive part of the planning field. So my point here is when you're designing modern roundabouts, think not just of level of service and crashes, but try to think beyond the circulating lanes the whole area, sidewalks and the whole perimeter, and get help from landscape architects and other folks, and try to create a people space there, a public space. And you can use the central island too to reinforce local values and cultures and identity. And try to make it, maybe not so much your rural intersegments, but in the suburbs and the urban areas, try to get folks to help you to create a people space there.
Yeah, you hit a good point. The roundabout discussion is a different one depending on the location and the intent of what you want to use the roundabout for. Any other thoughts from the panel? And then maybe at this point I might open it up to the audience for comments and questions, but any other comments?
On the question of who else to better engage on this conversation, I think we've got two right off the bat. One is our freight stakeholders. You know, it's not just as simple as using the turning template softwares or analyzing it in your office. You really need to have that conversation with your stakeholders who represent the trucking interests, both at the state level and in many cases at the community level, and let them be a part of that solution shaping process. Because if you lose powerful interests, you're going to lose every future opportunity, at least for a period of time. The other is take the time to have conversations with your emergency services providers and your elected officials in what I would call safe environments. Don't wait until the public meeting to ask the fire chief to weigh in on that proposal. Don't wait for the public meeting to ask the mayor or the alderman or the state legislator to take a position. Try to arrange for safe opportunities to let them ask their questions. They have questions, but I assure you they don't want to look stupid when they ask them. So you need to give them a place to ask those questions in a safe way where you can answer, where you can have a candid conversation. There's no quicker way to kill a roundabout project, or really any other one, that is as fast and abrupt as having a fire chief or a police chief stand up in front of the community and be either ambivalent or negative about what you're proposing.
Yeah, very good point. I have to share a quick story here. I'll pick my 30 seconds. I sat down next to a fire chief after about the 4th public meeting in a particular community, and I may have started this off badly by saying, "Are you on board yet?" And as I sat down next to him, and apparently it didn't go very well after that, but I thought it was being kind of funny. But he wasn't in a funny mood. So I share with you guys. I share with you guys that these are all good discussions, and I might open it up to the audience now. Any comments or questions for the panelists? So now I come from a big extended family, so I can manage all this, so we can all talk at the same time. I'm just joking. We'll try to hold on to some decorum. But I'd like to just have some really good interaction. One of the questions, let's just pose it. Well, let's bring up the French thing. How do you put 30,000 roundabouts in a country in 25 years? And we're at 3,000.
Could I comment on the Australian thing that was raised?
Yeah, Australia, sorry, yeah. France and Australia, I left you out, I'm sorry. Left it wrong. It's the same thing, yeah, a lot of roundabouts. A lot of them.
I hope you can hear me. Actually, it's interesting. In the late 70s, early 80s, there was the same sort of situation in Australia. The roundabouts were new, there were champions of roundabouts, and amongst engineers, those who were suspicious. I remember this as a very short period of time. And roundabouts took off very quickly, and there was no more talk about it. We didn't have roundabout conferences, much more big debates. So how did this happen? I asked myself the question, what is that? Just a few thoughts about this. Certainly we didn't have the traffic circles, big traffic circles and problems like that. But I heard Howard talking about cost being something against it. And also I heard the word, well, how do you stop people, right, these new animals? In fact, that gives me some answers as well. Well, I'll go to the stop issue. In Australia, you didn't have that issue because we had two-way yield signs. You stop people all the time. You have always stop control, which we don't have at all. So in the residential areas, shopping centers, because you didn't have always stop control, roundabout was really natural to put in when you have a little bit of traffic, not necessarily signals, so it answers the cause. And also I feel that you have a bit of a perfectionist approach, sort of like, I feel that you don't trust the driver as much, so you put too many signs and, you know, lane markings and so on. So when I say that, I'm comparing with the Australian approach. There are not as many signs and lane markings. Never put lane markings on the circulator road, other than if it's left only, you know, the double left, and there'll be just one, sorry. Yeah, your left turn. So I think there are the observations, but I think one thing maybe like Ken experienced, bottom-up approach of putting these roundabouts in residential areas, little shopping center, low cost, you know, small size roundabouts. So maybe you should attack always stop control signs, right? There's a little bit of problem. Put this low cost, you don't have to open up like big areas to put these in. In our residential areas, it's just normal, like you always stop. There is a roundabout somehow magically. You know, we don't take land from houses there and so on. So people get familiar with that. When there's a bigger project, you don't have as much problem. If you go with a big project, first time roundabout, they've never seen, then maybe there is big hesitance. They are my observations. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good observations, Rami. Thank you for sharing. I spent some time northeast of Adelaide, and I got tired of the bumps in the road. And remember, I was a signals guy, and I liked driving fast. And so this is the whole issue that I think that we get locked into some things. I see Michael in the back. He's got his arms up high. You want to share some Australian stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that was different about Australia, because when I designed the first, or helped design the first roundabout ever in Australia, it was a three-lane roundabout. We had no information about roundabouts whatsoever. All we had was a photograph. So a couple of sat down, we designed this three-lane roundabout. Okay. The DOT took the city approved it, no public hearings, no, it was just approved it and we built it. It was like 6 months from day one till we built it without a standard or anything, and we just based it on principles, you got an island, you make cars go around it. And then the second one I did, the boss said, we got to get the policeman out of this big intersection, 80,000 cars a day or something. And he said, I need you to get this policeman out. So I said, okay, a couple of us sat down, we drew this roundabout, the trams going through the middle of it. It cost us about $5,000 to put it in. It was an experiment, right? And ours, I think it was like 40,000 cars a day on one road, 35,000 on the other. Signals wouldn't work. The policeman didn't work. He was getting sick. And so we experimented, and it worked. And so, for 10 years, we did roundabouts 1 and 2 and 3-lane roundabouts, and then we got a standard. So we didn't get into, everything has to be perfect, and we didn't have the liability issues like you guys have over here. But we were more willing, as engineers, as a DOT, to simply try something.
Right.
If it worked, good. If it didn't, we modify.
What I hear is it's a less structured piece, and I'm going to pose that question to the panel here, and maybe Jeff to start with Federal Highways. Certainly less structure, it sounds like, allowed that stuff to kind of go on in a lot of different places, and I sit in a state DOT, and structure is there, and there are a lot of whatever barriers to whether or not you can allow people to make decisions that aren't in the structure.
Actually, I just want to make a comment on the Australian and French.
Okay, yeah. Let's start with that.
Just an observation, maybe a commentary on, we're, as engineers and as technical professionals, we didn't study the social sciences. We're not accustomed to changing the culture, as it were. But I found it interesting in a few cases in the UK and in some of the Gulf states in the Middle East. And this says something about the cultural aspect of what we're talking about, where roundabouts had been in place for many, many decades. And the DOT there, the transportation agency, was proposing to tear out a roundabout and replace it with a conventional US-style traffic signal. Big turn lanes, protected phasing, the whole deal. And the resistance, the outcry by the community, by the public, was exactly the mirror image of what we have here, which would be take out the signal and put in the roundabouts and people setting themselves on fire. This was the reverse, and I found that very interesting, but also very telling, because they're used to roundabouts, and to them the signals represented something dramatically different. And there was a whole lot of discomfort with a change of that significant. We're dealing with that here too, continuing to deal with that here, but I think it just underscores how we're not that different. It's just that we have a different, 50 to 70 years of infrastructure and driving experience that we have to reconcile. And they're dealing with it elsewhere on the flip side. It's very interesting.
Great comment.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead there, Paul.
I can attempt to maybe to think of what happened in France, because I don't think France is a very informal culture to try and experiment and all that. They're usually a very standard, has to be in a document before it gets accepted. But for one thing, France had a lot of priority to the right, and so like you come to an intersection, and it was, you had to always watch out because the car on the right had to have right of way. So that kind of had people thinking about slowing down. So that may have helped get roundabouts introduced in France. The other thing is there was an experimental program, an official experimental program called Safe City, Safe Neighborhoods type thing, and there was a whole period in the mid-'80s where they were looking at especially like highways through small towns, and I think they hit upon roundabouts as being a very good speed reduction measure, and so there's cases and cases of small villages where you have roundabout at the entrance and a roundabout at the exit, and that probably helped to popularize roundabouts in France. That's my hypothesis.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's like us, we spend a lot of staff time taking care of one speed limit request from one small town. A few can relate to that, I'm sure. Any thoughts as we talk about, the panel can take this question. Now we're in the unstructured part. You can see I'm doing a lot of hands and arms.
There are a lot of questions.
Oh, good. Throw them out. Yeah, we'll go ahead there.
Jeff, I think, you guys have spent a lot of time working Northeast Roundabout Conference and Southeast, and coming from a state that's kind of a slow adopter, just wanted to see what your perspective was on some of the slow adopting states and some of the, some of the successes, and, in what states you've had successes to kind of get them moving along.
I think the common denominator across the board at the state level has always been that we finally find that one or two individuals who were ready to champion the effort, and they were willing to put in the extra time and effort, a lot of extra hours on that first proposal, and they were fully invested in it. They're the, it's the champion model, and time and again it's been that champion model that has proven to finally get us over the hump in a particular state. I think we're seeing that in Tennessee now. I think we're coming up kind of over the bend now with roundabouts, certainly with a lot of other innovative intersections. And there's no question that the peer support that many of you in this room have been involved with and continue to provide across state lines and across jurisdictional boundaries have made a huge difference. And so that's very appreciated, and I definitely thank all of you for all the things that you've done to help your fellow practitioners learn and get that first one under their belt.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I'd say the champion is very important. That's sort of day-to-day activity, but buy-in from the leadership, because that will sort of trump everything and push things away. So if the secretary of the DOT or the district engineer, or whatever the equivalent is, that's really important to get their buy-in and their support, so that the champion knows that if they come up against a tricky situation, they're going to have their back.
Yeah, the two definitely go hand in hand to a large degree.
I'd like to weigh in here, if I may. The models we're talking about right now are getting roundabouts going. The same models we were talking about in 2005, and they're not scalable. Yes, champions are good for the first few roundabouts. Yes, if a developer or a residential neighbor or somebody wants one, this is great for getting their first few roundabouts going. But it's not going to get us 450,000 roundabouts. And I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but thinking out loud here, it seems to me that a lot of what we're doing is reactive. Oh, here's a intersection with crashes, or someone has an idea for that intersection, and that's all good. But again, it's onesie twosies for the most part. And I was thinking maybe we should try to think of a proactive mode. And there's dangers to that, but let me explain what I mean by that. A proactive mode is where you have to systematically go out and go after roundabouts rather than waiting for them or some champion to come to you. And I like to tell the story of when the difference between reactive engineering and proactive engineering was brought home to me very vividly. I was having a conversation with an engineer, and he told me in his home country they had terrible crashes at four-way stops in the middle of rural areas. This is the desert country where you can see the other traffic at a great distance. It made no sense that they were having these crashes. This is Michael Woolwork. And so what they tried doing on one of these roads is offsetting the other road so that you didn't have the same intersection. And that solved the problem. So that's reactive engineering. Then they said, well, let's see if we have any more of these, and they found that they had 400 other intersections like this, and they wouldn't change all 400 of them. That's proactive engineering. So maybe we should shift our model from the reactive stuff we've been doing in the early days to a proactive, systematic approach. Now, there's dangers to that. If the feds come along and say, okay, well, you've got 37 intersections you need to change, and we have the data to prove it. I don't know how that would go over, but I'm just throwing out ideas here and pointing out that the models we're talking about are not real scalable, and it's the same thing we were talking about at Vail in 2005.
But I'm going to piggyback on that, and Jeff touched on some education stuff earlier. I don't disagree. You know, the grassroots level on a project-by-project basis or state works well, but what do we do more nationally to change the argument? I mean, federal highway's been a great help with proven safety countermeasures, and roundabouts a safer choice, but let's just pick one solution, the signal that comes up all the time at a rural two-way stop control intersection. And I struggle with this. Why is it, if there's one frustration in 20 years of engineering that I've had, and I dabble in the human factors engineering, why is it when a two-way stop controlled intersection in a rural location, and we just had a tragic double fatality 2 weeks ago, and the community's clamoring for a signal, and the news media's stumbling over each other to get the live shot out there, and why is Oregon DOT not doing something? Why is the public outraged when there's a double fatality out at a two-way stop controlled intersection? Yet when a signal light, and I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, I have never in 20 years had outrage when a fatality or serious injury happens at a signalized intersection. The public accepts it. Oh, the idiot ran a red light. Oh, it was a drunk driver going through the intersection. There's no outrage. And what are we doing nationally to create outrage? I compared the DUI that's gone on in schools. They go do the shock and awe and show in the school system. Why aren't we showing pictures of signalized intersections of a fatal crash happening in public meetings or that type of outreach? And I know we want to be proactive and positive, but maybe we need a negative, the hazards of signalized intersections brochure that goes national to change kind of the culture in that area.
So hold that thought. And it's a really good, you've posed something that, it's a big culture. I think that there's a lot of information that we get overloaded with, and so you're fighting for a bandwidth in there. But it's a very good point. So I'm going to look at that as a comment, Kevin. It's a very well articulated, and maybe I'll ask a comment behind you, Danny. You had your hand up, and there were a couple of hands. I'll work my way around the room, and we're on a general idea of roundabout implementation and some of the things that have hung you up, or so. Dana. And then Robin.
I was just going to share my very small experience compared to everybody here. I've started working up in small counties up north, and started in 2004. Had an opportunity to get roundabouts in just from the safety benefits. And now we did have a collision up in Whatcom County, and they asked for a roundabout. We have in Oak Harbor on Whidbey Island worked with the mayor and his second mayor now, and we've laid out a series of roundabouts how they want their corridor. They don't have money, but when Walgreens went in, they positioned the building as a requirement so that it wouldn't be taken in the future. But my experience has been, and we've put 20 in my state routes in the last 4 years, and 40% have been paid by local agencies and grant money, not by DOT. They sell themselves, but we don't have money to put more to get the 30,000. And it's as simple as that. Deming wants them, they bisect the town. We just don't have money.
So the revenue's interesting on the state DOT side, and that would be a good segue to Robin from the city of Bend, 30 plus roundabouts, and I don't know how the revenue piece works there, but maybe you had a comment.
Yeah, so one of my questions or thoughts was, do we have TRB or IT or the Federal Highways an audit of what new engineers have been taught in their civil engineering curriculums? Do we know that they're being taught roundabouts, that they're being taught almost that public debate of how to answer the myths? Or are all our new engineers coming out with the same old signal, the same old geometric design classes that I took in the 80s? And I don't know, but my sense is that they are not. That they have to get a job, and then they somehow stumble upon a roundabout training program that either their city has sent them to, had the good fortune of knowing about, that they even know to ask to be sent to training. I don't know. And is there some audit on what civil engineers are being taught?
That's a very good question, Robin, and I don't recall that I've heard the term audit being used during this effort, but I do know that there's been a lot of effort focused on not necessarily roundabouts, but the question of how are we teaching transportation safety, traffic safety to our college students. And there's been enormous effort in documenting what most of the students are learning and how we can integrate safety better into those curriculums. I believe there's an NCHRP report that looked at that. I know in the ITE realm, the Education Council has been very focused on this for quite some time. There are some programs who are doing a very, very good job of getting safety into that, but when you start talking to the civil engineering professors, they have a tremendous challenge that lies before them. They're being asked to include so many different things and so many different disciplines that they're facing some very, very tough choices. And a lot of times, unfortunately, safety, not just intersection safety now, but safety is a casualty of all the different things they have to work into their required hours. So it's tough, but it is something that people are very, very focused on. We want to make it better. Some schools do teach roundabouts in their transportation safety courses, traffic courses. Some.
It helps when the university gets a roundabout on the campus. I think maybe you can relate to that. Yeah, my alma mater now have one, so I'm happy about that.
By the way, I also want to,
oh yeah.
I just want to mention one thing to keep in mind when we talk about Kevin's point. How do you build the outrage? How do we overcome the instinct of people to immediately ask for a signal? Well, I will say this: within our profession, and I'm very, very hopeful that this produces the change that it represents. But with MAP 21 and the construct of a performance-based framework for federal aid highway program, it's going to change how we think at the agency level, all the way up and down. When you have to set targets for different performance criteria, including safety, we're talking about lives now. You have to set a target and be measured against that target and be measured on that goal. And at some point have to deal with the consequences of perhaps not attaining that goal. It's going to revolutionize how we program projects, how we make our choices. So I would say don't underestimate where we're headed.
Could I jump in?
Yeah, and then I'm going to call on Gene there for that, so we don't lose the thought of the university piece.
That is-
Hang in there, Gene. I know I'm telling Gene he can't talk. That's not a good thing. So.
I think Jeff's point is really powerful. Performance-based, how you gonna, the environmentalists do this. They have numbers, targets you have to reach. This is not unusual. But my quick comment spun off something Kevin was saying about inverting the conversation. I was at a social gathering in Wilderness, and one fellow was saying to me, well, I could see having a few roundabouts, but not too many. And I said to him, well, on what possible basis would you justify putting in intersections that kill at 10 times the rate of roundabouts? And he just looked at me blankly. So instead of saying, oh, did you know that roundabouts reduce fatalities by 90%? Instead say, well, why would you want to put in an intersection that kills people at 10 times the rate of a roundabout? So just that comment.
So Ken wants us to be more controversial in answering questions. I appreciate that. He has taught me that. Thank you, Ken. So Gene, I'm there finally. You had some thoughts on the university piece.
Yeah, I feel like I got to get the Kansas story in a little bit.
Yeah.
I won't take a lot of time. I could probably talk 20 minutes on several points that came up. I need to write this up sometime. But I've seen this roundabout thing go from hate to love in a lot of different areas. And I think Kansas is one of the lead states. And we're getting up around 200. But Kansas is a Jekyll and Hyde situation where the state has bought in, and I don't think there's a manager in the state that doesn't like roundabouts and promote roundabouts, but local cities, that's where I've seen some of the worst opposition to roundabouts in various pockets around the state. And I think for the state to buy in, it was education. I got to thank Maryland. Around the mid-90s, our state traffic engineer, I think he visited Niederhauser out there, and he come in, Niederhauser convinced him, hey, these things are great. And he come back and said, hey, these are great. And we have a transportation conference every year at K-State, and we get about 300 state people. So we got Lee Forston out, started talking about roundabouts. And of course, we have the Secretary of Transportation, the Chief Engineer, and all the managers there. Okay, and then I got Michael out 3 or 4 times to put on courses, and I made sure the managers came there. In fact, I had the Barry Crown out to put on a course. And in fact, along the way, Howard was there. In fact, I think even Ed put on a one-day course down there at KDOT. But it was education that sold the state people. It was education. And we got to promote that. So.
Yeah, good point. I'm going to point a question to you, Gene. Curriculum at Kansas State University?
Yeah,
does it include roundabouts?
When I got my bachelor's degree, I think it required took about 160 hours. And over the years, that's coming down and down and down and down, where you need less hours to graduate, and something has to come out of the program. So it's one of the big arguments in the university, what do you take out of the program? Now, one of my colleagues teaches a safety course, but it's kind of the course where you teach how to do safety research. You teach about all the the statistics that you need and the statistical programs you need to analyze safety research. I think there's too much of that more than rather how do you go out and design a better intersection and so forth.
Yeah.
But in the cities in Kansas, so there's no real opposition. In fact, one of the first talks I gave, it was here in Seattle. I don't remember that or not.
I remember your old overheads that you flipped back and forth.
No, I always say I'm the old slide rule guy. I was the only one at the conference that had overheads. Everybody else, had PowerPoint. And I didn't even see one there, so I went to this lady that was in charge, and I said, I need a projector. So she, I'll get you one. It was the worst one I've ever seen. It didn't focus right or anything. But anyway, that talk was, I had a whole file about this thick, about opposition to roundabouts in the cities, not at the state level. You know, there was editorials like, traffic will back up 20 miles. We'll need a police station in the center island to take care of all the crashes. We will put up bleachers and sell tickets. I'm serious. And the only thing I remember was Bruce Robinson. I met him there. He's one of the early roundabout leaders with Kittelson. And this still sticks in my craw. Sometime after that, there was this big conference up in Wisconsin on intersection safety. It was a big conference. Vets had a lot to do with it. Bruce and I were the only one in there that had roundabouts in mind. Had a breakout session. You know, how do you improve safety at intersections? Bruce and I mentioned roundabouts. We got scared. They ha, like we're making a joke. It still irritates me anyway. But that's a true story. But anyway, in the cities it becomes political. In fact, in Manhattan, Kansas, we got a couple in there. The city engineer just put them in because he didn't tell anybody. And they worked fine. But then somehow, and he admits that he made a mistake, he put in 7 speed control traffic circles. And I mean, they are speed control. Some of them are hard to get around. And man, the people hated them. And I spent 10 years, and I finally gave up trying to convince people those are not modern roundabouts. Okay? Those are like speed humps. They're not modern roundabouts. But it took 10 years to get another roundabout in. 10 years to convince people that they work. Anyway,
No, Gene, thank you. So the motto there, I think, is act locally, think globally, because I think that what happens in this country is you think about the 6,000 jurisdictions. Some have it moving pretty good, and it takes that local piece to move.
I'll say one more thing that Jeff said, that some of our early research, the early research we did on the first 11 roundabouts in Kansas was on operation. Okay, we figured, you know, safety was even improved. There were others that proved the safety, so we convinced them, yeah, they were operating. And Kansas was a big state. They have 6 or 7 now on busy 2-lane high-speed highways, intersections of 2 state highways where it's 65 miles an hour. They work well. One of them has 40% trucks. No problem. So in fact, that's mentioned in the design guide. You can see some pictures of those, and it works quite well.
So how do we tell one of our regional administrators that story? That's the hardest part.
But the worst opposition I saw was in Hutchinson, and it's a strange story. There was one down there, I think Michael designed that one. That's the best success story I know of. 18 months before, they had like 25 crashes. About 20 of them were right angled. 10 of them were injury crashes. Afterwards, over an 8-month period, 18-month period, they had 6 fender benders. I mean, how much more of a success story can you get? But people down there hated them. They had a retired police officer formed an organization, CAPS, Citizens Against Roundabouts. And lawn signs and billboards all over town. In an election, they kicked out the 2 people that supported roundabouts. They got that one in there. And it took them another 10 years before they'd even talk about another roundabout. It's all political.
I think, yeah, on that note, thank you, Gene. I appreciate hearing from you. There's a couple other people in the back that I had some hands up there. Yeah, John. Comment, question?
On the stepping back a year or 2 from what you're talking about, the very beginning of roundabouts in this country was Lee Bowerson, who had a solution looking for a problem, I think, and he came to me. But anyway, he got, similarly with Mike Walworth here, he found a developer that wanted to do something different northwest of Las Vegas, and he designed 3-lane roundabouts. So that's a similarity
Right, Summerlin, Nevada, as I remember the name. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting how things like that happened. We would to get a triple lane in our state right now, it's still a long, long discussion. I guess we needed to go early when nobody knew you could pose it. No, I think this has been a really good discussion because I think there's some really good points here that there has to be advocacy. There are spots where we clearly are not messaging it as well as we could. In the panel, I have about 5 minutes here, maybe even less than that, 4 minutes, maybe some closing comments. And focus those closing comments maybe a little bit on, you know, where we headed, but really what we've learned and what we continue to need to do, because I think there's some good things that we're doing. Howard?
I just want to add some of Kevin's comment about the backlash against signals. We went down to Long Island, did a presentation promoting roundabouts, and I showed a video. A lot of people may have seen it already. Dayton, Ohio, where the pedestrian gets run over by the Subaru after getting hit by the PT Cruiser. The car ran the light. The light was red for 20 seconds before the car got there.
It's graphic.
Go back to the office, and 2 days later, I get a call from the chief engineer that, you know, we were getting complaints of using scare tactics. Typical roundabouts. So we put a little disclaimer on the video before we showed it. And also the red light running videos, you know, they're pretty comical to show what people do at signalized intersections. Just, you know, there will be backlash from going that route.
Any closing comments there, since you have the mic? And then I'll pass it to Ken, and we'll bring it right down the line here to Ed.
Closing comments, definitely the internal champion helps, and it only takes one person high enough that doesn't like them to shut the department down. And that, unfortunately, is maybe a harder thing to address.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that has surprised and delighted me is that all the different applications people have found for roundabouts that would never have crossed my mind. Putting them at the bottom of interstate ramps, and on and on. So this is really interesting and a really healthy thing that it turns out that roundabouts are the solution to all human problems.
I like that, Ken.
I guess just to say that I do think we have turned another corner with roundabouts, and I know Ken kind of alluded to a feeling of Groundhog Day, talking about some of the same issues that you recall being discussed in Vail and Kansas City and so on. But it's the good news is I see many new faces being a part of that conversation, many new faces, and I see the tone of the conversation with many states and local agencies has shifted. It's very rare that you find skepticism now. What you often find are genuine questions. Hey, help us get this right. How, you know, what about this? What about that? What about pedestrians? Or so it's no longer really a question of if. It's just a matter of how to do it better and how to get it right so that we don't trip and put ourselves behind for a few years. So I think I go out of this feeling very optimistic once again.
As someone who's been at this a long time, I'm happy to see that the conversation at this conference in Seattle is very different than the conversation in Loveland in 1998, which is, some of you were there. It's gotten much more civil, and we're nibbling at the edges of our differences. There are differences. There will continue to be differences. Those differences will make our practice and our designs better. But we're getting much closer to it. So that's sort of my closing thought is let's be civil about this. And then I'd also like to thank Brian formally for helping with this session, but the conference. It's been a great conference, and thanks for all your efforts.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for setting up the session. I like these kind of sessions. I know that it gets kind of the Wild West or maybe the Wild Down Under, but it gets a little, I mean, I like the interaction because I think that we learn from each other. It's like one big extended family. Everybody's invited to Easter dinner. You don't have to sit next to the people you don't want to. So with that, thank you, the panel. I wanted to thank the panel. We can give them a round of applause. And Gene had a comment, although I think I'm going to probably mention this. You know, we have a town forum. Yeah, town forum at the end of next session. So this session ends, you'll go to another session hopefully, and stay around for the town forum. The town forum is going to be a little bit, we're going to separate out in groups of 8 and 10, and we're going to really have some pretty good things that we want to talk about and have these groups bring forward to have a kind of an agenda to run on for the next 3 years and and help us with research, but also some of the social engineering stuff that we touched today. So the group, if you had fun with this, show up at the town forum. Thank you. All right.